Okay, and so, we had a good intro on Bootstrap. Let me boot up the projector here. And you learn how to get started with Bootstrap. You learn how to add classes, and that's how Bootstrap does its work, all the legwork for you. But I hope another takeaway that you had from this morning's lecture on Bootstrap is that really the documentation is like your best friend. And so I don't think that it's perfect, but for everything that we're going to need to do in this class, it's like, okay, I need to do this in Bootstrap. Let me find it in the documentation. Let me read the docs and figure out how it's done. Now, these PowerPoints are just made directly from that documentation. And so, yes, you can come to these PowerPoints and they are an abbreviated version of the docs. But I just want to, as we get into talking about the Bootstrap grid system, which is a different layout than Flexbox, but it's another very similar tool to Flexbox for laying out entire pages using this Bootstrap grid. I just want to point out how important the docs are. And so when you kind of go out there, you go to getbootstrap.com and uh, 5.2's in beta, so let's go to 5.1. And we spent a lot of time in utilities this morning. Colors and borders and background and spacing and text. I mean, if you in summary, review, here's all the different links under utilities. I mean, we did this one, we did this one, we did this one, we did.
I have a screen sharing with you.
We did this one, sharing my screen right now. What else did we do? We did some spacing, we did some text, we did some, so we didn't hit all of the different utilities, but, pretty quickly you see that we covered quite a bit of ground under this utilities. Another big chunk of Bootstrap that we have not covered, and we will, are components. And to kind of show how easy it can be to get started with these components, again, just kind of starting from scratch, pull up my code editor and under getting started, right? So getting started, we come down to the starter template, bring in the starter template. It's also interesting this is lower. So used to that being capitalized. Moving on. Once we got the starter template in here, it's like, okay, let's go to components and look at the nav bar. And it's important, as you're learning this, to not just copy paste code, to look at the different classes and understand, what each class does, right? But it's also, and I've been guilty of this, it's like, okay, I need a nav bar. Well, here's an example nav bar. Is this what I want? Well, no, you just keep scrolling and say, okay, here's a nav bar that just has a brand in it. And so, here's a nav bar with an image in it. So let's just copy this. Now this image is an SVG. Good thing we just covered SVG images. But this is a relative path. I don't have that relative path. So that image probably isn't going to... I mean, we can throw it in there and take a look. But I guess what I'm saying is, because I don't have a docs folder, yeah, that image isn't going to show up. Probably if you downloaded, no, let's see. Yeah, okay, anyways. let me just go back up to this one though. Just nav bar with some links, and we don't have any images in here. Here's our nav tag. Copy, paste that in. And now we've got a nav bar that, by the way, without linking to the JavaScript, that drop-down arrow doesn't work. So if you ever get a nav bar like this where it's not responding the right way, it might be because of the JavaScript. And there we go. Now we've got, that cheeseburger menu, and how easy was that to get a nav bar with some responsiveness and pretty much what you would expect out of a mobile responsive site. And now how do I start changing this? Well, here's our here's the code that it gave us. I mean, literally, I just copied 50 lines or not 50 lines, from line 14 to line 49 just for my nav bar, right? So I've been guilty of it in the past, of just like going into these components and copying and pasting the code. But as I've grown, I realized the value of learning each individual component and learning each class and how each class works. And going in through the docs, here's a little bit more simple nav bar, right? So this one, I kind of like this one a little bit more because it doesn't have the search built in, and it's 20 lines of code as opposed to 40 lines of code. And here's our features link, pricing. Here's the disabled, class of disabled for a disabled link. Save it, refresh it, and so you can kind of see how easy it is to get, again, a Bootstrap nav bar. With that being said, just going to the docs, going to the components, there's a bunch of things in here, of which I spent the first 20 minutes of this class battling an accordion. And yeah, I can get that accordion to work, and in fact I do plan on getting that accordion to work, but why not just use the Bootstrap accordion? Literally come into here, copy the code, and flush it out. Like literally paste, launch, and there's our accordion. Right, accordion item 1, so you want to change accordion item 1. This will say, what do you need it to say? And this says what it needs to say. Right, so components. Under utilities, we talk about spacing and colors and flexbox. Under components, we talk about the different things that are common, and we get, what are those things? We'll break a lot of these things down, like cards. Again, we already covered nav bars, buttons, badges, spinners, all these things. There used to be, there's a carousel. So here's an image carousel. So there's our carousel. So just worth noting that. Now, that's not the topic of this conversation. The topic of this conversation is under layout. So again, we covered a lot of utilities. I just wanted to touch on components, and we will break into these components. We will get into forms. We're going to learn regular HTML forms, and then we'll learn Bootstrap forms. But under layout, we have the grid. Now, the first thing above the grid, well, we got breakpoints, and we're already familiar with breakpoints. We also have, very similar to what we've done manually, was with a wrapper. And so very similar to the wrapper div is this concept of a container. And so you could see the class of container. So let's go ahead and mess with these containers before we get into the grid. And again, this is going to be a div with the class of container. And let's just put in an H1 with my heading. And you can kind of see that my heading is in some sort of container with margins equally on each side. And if you think of a wrapper div, is this not exactly what we did with the wrapper? We balanced out the white space on the left and the right by giving a width and evening out or autoing the margin. And so the way this class of container works without any other breakpoints, it says, okay, for extra small devices, basically go 100% width. So anything less than 576 pixels, again, if I do here and I go to 550 pixels, you can basically see it's 100% width of the parent. Now there is a little bit of extra padding on this, but you could see that there's no margin on the left and right. So that is for the extra small. But if we kind of go back to the docs, there we go.
There's a table on the slides too, that same table.
Yeah, the same table's on the slides. So as soon as I break this 576, you can see that my container is then going to be 540 pixels wide. So let's go to, for example, 577. And if I inspect on my container, not on my heading, but on my container, now you can see I've got the max width of 540 pixels. So I begin to have some margin, right? And kind of jump ahead. And this is just on the standard container. 500 and greater than or equal to 768. So let's plug in that number, 768. And if I inspect the container, now you can see I have a max width of 720 pixels.
If you put some background on the heading, it becomes a lot easier to see.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. So let's target my...
And then I usually just kind of, if you resize it fluidly, you'll see it as well.
And if I say background H1, so it always helps to add some background colors, so I'm not constantly having to inspect.
And then if you just resize it by dragging the edges,
Yeah,
you'll see that it kind of stair steps up.
here we go. So the larger devices they all have more margin, is really what it boils down to. And then so, after that, so this is your standard container. Identical by this chart is container small. But then as soon as you hit container medium, you're going to notice container medium has 100% width for small and extra small. And then you're going to start to see the margins or the extra spacing evening out on both sides. So let's just do a container hyphen MD in our code. Container hyphen MD. Now for the small and extra small, let me inspect instead of doing that. You're going to see it's basically going 100% width, and then here you can start to see where the white space is balancing out on both sides. So this is very similar to our wrapper. Again, it allows different responses based on the device screen size.
Now, how is it different than, say, because what you've done with your wrapper, I think, before was 80%, right? It's always 80% of the screen.
Yeah.
And that, the way that one's set up, it varies in percentage
Right.
as the screen grows, it's not always 80%, but within a certain range, it's a fixed width. So basically what it allows you to do
Right.
is anything within that container, you can kind of treat it, you don't have to deal with so many little breakpoints, like what if the screen size is this and this and this, you don't have to get it pixel perfect. It means that you're targeting like 5 or 6 screen sizes instead of like 1,000 screen sizes, you know, is the point of that.
Yeah. Yeah, good point.
You know, getting away from just being fluid. Versus if you do container fluid at the bottom there, it's always 100%. And so
Yeah, let's do
you
a
are doing fluid, a fluid layout.
Container fluid is where you're always going to be 100%.
So is that kind of like some sort of default? Because it seems as you get bigger, you're getting margin, even though it's.
I think that's just how it's responding as I'm resizing it, because you notice as soon as I stop it.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason we're seeing that spacing, I think, is some padding. Let's see, where's that coming from? Yeah, so we got
Is
actually,
that margin or padding?
that's padding.
Okay.
That's actually a little bit of padding on
On the container.
on the container, yeah. Yeah, container fluid, padding left, padding right. Yeah.
So container fluid and container have some very different behaviors with how they step up and what you want to use them for.
So once you start putting other content in the container, it'll also, I guess, grow and shrink as you size up and down.
Right. The big difference is because if you look at container, it does a stair step, and so it's always between this range it's 540, between this range it's 720, between this range it's that. So you're only targeting a small number of fixed sizes versus when you're looking at container fluid, you have to target and test it on every single screen size from 0 to 2,000 or whatever your max is, right? And you can't just say, hey, I'm only going to test at point A, B, C, and D, if that makes sense. So it's part of just limiting the space of what you have to test and what devices you're targeting, you know.
Yep, cool, thank you. Okay, so that's just your container, again, similar to a wrapper, but now to get into the grid system. With the grid system, there's a magic number, and the number to remember is 12. It's a 12-column system, and so the idea is that your units are going to add up to 12. And so, for example, if your one div is measured at 12, units, then you're going to get 1 item per row. But if you have 2 divs that are 6 and 6, then you're going to get 2 items per row. 4, 4, and 4, of course, adds up to 12. So you're going to get 3 items per row. 3, 3, 3, of course, 4 items per row. You got a bunch of 2s, and so that's 6. And if you got a bunch of 1s, that's 12. And so the first thing on the grid system is that, okay, it does need a container. And so we just learned how to add a container to a div. And so we'll start with that. And then inside of the container, you're going to have child elements. And those child elements are going to add up to, for even numbers, you're going to add them up to 12. And for every 12 units will become 1 row. And so if you look at this example, the outermost is our container. So you do need a container. Inside of the container, you have a row. I guess I did skip that. You need the class of row. And then inside of that row, you have call -4. So this is going to say, 4 units out of 12, which is 1/3. And then a call -8, which is, of course, 2/3 of the space. So in this case, we have one row. The first column is a third. The second column is 2/3. To kind of just chunk this up here into my HTML. Let's take that out. So div class row. So these are requirements, right? It has to, your rows have to be in containers, and then each row, if it's going to add up to a perfect row, should add up to 12. Now there are cases where they add up to more than 12, but then that's where you start getting multiple rows, right? So each row is 12 units, and this would be the outcome. Now, let me take this off. Because we're in a container, you can see there's still the margin on the container. Here's my row. Within my row, of course, you see the two columns, a third and 2/3. Now, keep in mind, I don't have any like mediums or larges or extra smalls. So what is this doing here is a mobile first layout. In other words, it's going to be the same for all device widths, right? So this is going to be one row regardless of, regardless of device. So of course we're going to learn how to change that, and you might already have some speculation on how you could do that, but this is a mobile first response since it's you don't have any other text abbreviations there. And we bring this slide back to talk about breakpoints. You've seen this before. Let's talk about this. Call medium 4. So it says on medium devices and up, add up to 12, you're going to get basically 3 parts even to be your row, right? But it did not account for small or extra small devices. And because of that, the default is to go into a single column format. And so because here, in this example, we started without the text abbreviation, so it's just basically saying for extra small and up, do the same thing. But on this example, we started with call medium 4, and if I take this example in, again, I need a container and I need a row. Inside of that row, on medium devices, they're they're even thirds. So here's my even thirds, and as soon as I break past that medium device size, you notice it goes into a single column, which is nice, again, I think, because mobile devices, you're going to want things just stacked on top of one another, more than likely. You don't have a whole lot of room for a lot of content in rows on a mobile device. So let's take a look at this one, right? So container. So we already know, since we're starting at medium and then extra large 2. So this tells me a couple of things. Number one, small and extra small is a column. Medium, we've got rows of 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? Because they're adding up to 12. And then on extra large, 1, 2, 6, 8, 10, 12, extra large, we're going to have a single row with 6 columns. And by looking at the code, this is your output that I just described. So it's important to remember that this is a mobile first approach. And if you don't specify anything smaller than medium, it's just going to default to a column. All right, so let's take a look at a few more examples. Layout grid, let's see if there's anything, and I know there's things at this PowerPoint. For example, if you leave off the numbers, like call -4, it's just going to do its own math. So div class of call, if you have 6 of them, they're all going to take up 2 measurements of units of 2, right? It just kind of so it talks about the breakpoints, talks about needing to be in a container. Rows are wrappers for columns. Columns are incredibly flexible, meaning you can be as precise as you need. Didn't really talk about gutters, but in between the columns, you can configure some gutters, and so that's basically kind of like your margin between columns. And so for example here, this row, since it doesn't have a number, but we have 2 divs with the class of call, it's basically going to be 6 and 6, right? This one, since we have 3 divs with the class of call, it's going to be 4, 4, and 4, right? And that's what they're showing you here. So if you just leave the number off, it just makes them all equal. This is interesting. So this one uses a combination of 6, which leaves you to say, well, this one's 3 and this one's 3, right? So it figured it out. All you had to do was set the middle one, and it did the math automatically to figure out, well, there's 6 parts left over, so that's going to be 3 and 3. Kind of the same thing here, even though it's not an even measurement. A call -5 leaves 12 units, or excuse me, 7 units left over, so it's going to have to be like 3.5, 3.5. It's just...
Yeah, I generally recommend against using the autos, which just call. I generally recommend against those because it usually has unexpected behaviors
Yeah.
at some point.
So we did this example, the call 8, the call 4. Here's a class that's a little different. A row, and on the row calls of 2. You get this 2 by 2. So let's do an example where in a large device we'll do a row of 4, and then in a medium device, so here I'll write this down, right? So large device, a row of 4, a medium device, 2 by 2, small device, column, right? Small and extra small. So 2 by 2. So I guess the first thing is we need another div because we're talking about item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4. Okay, so let's blank this out. Blank out all the classes. And this is kind of nice because small and extra small, then we know that's kind of like the default. There's going to be a column. So I would actually start with the medium device of call hyphen medium hyphen 6. Call medium 6. And we know that's going to get us call medium 6. Call medium 6. And that should get us a 2 by 2 until it breaks a certain point, and then it goes down into a single column. So if I use my toolbar here at that medium breakpoint, it basically goes from single column to 2 by 2. And now what I need left, what I have left over, is I need that large, call hyphen large, and I want to do a row of 4. So 3, 3, 3, and 3. So call hyphen large hyphen 3. Take this quick phone call, sorry. Okay, so call hyphen large hyphen 3 is how I would do this. Call large 3. Call large 3. Call large 3. So now I've got a single row until it gets down to a medium. Then I got 2 by 2. Then I get down to small and I get single column. And that's the grid in a nutshell. I mean, it's an important lecture. I hope you guys were able to follow along. Do we have any questions?
None for.
Okay. All right. Well, I think you guys are ready to start on the homework for Chapter 11. I'm here to answer any questions. You should be good. I'm pretty sure it's just making your first Bootstrap site, using some components and using a grid, and you should be good to go.